Good evening to all. Honorable Executive Director of Kalyan Bharati Trust, Mr. Praveen Roy, Chief Executive Officer, Mr. Pradeep Agarwal, Dr. Pushpita Ranjan Bhattacharya, Principal of the Heritage College, colleagues, friends, my dear students and esteemed speakers. Welcome to all of you. We look forward to a stimulating session. Dr. Bibek Ray Chaudhuri today's presentation. Thank you.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity. See, this is my plan basically. So I'll just give a brief introduction and I look at the facts for India. Then I look for certain projections which have been made by international organizations on what is going to happen in India. Then I look at some of the policy responses from the government, both on the fiscal front and on the monetary front. Then I'll give a bit of diagnosis of the policy responses. What do I think about these policies? And then I'll go to the opportunities. And little bit I'll look at trade challenges and way forward. So if you look at this crisis, I think the most striking feature of this crisis is that it has started from a health hazard or health pandemic, and now from a health contagion, it has transformed into an economic contagion. Now, one of the reasons why the spread was so rapid definitely has to do with the globalization. Since the countries are more integrated than ever, even though if you look at 2019, there was a considerable slowdown in trade all over the world. And because of the US-China trade war, it was also observed that there were, I think, protectionist tendencies which were seen mostly in the developed world. And naturally, as a reaction, it also percolated down to the developing and mainly the emerging markets. So that was, I would say the economic situation with which we entered the pandemic. So naturally what happened was that this pandemic naturally caused further disruptions. And the major point that we want to make here is that this pandemic, in contrast to the other economic crises that we have seen, is not because of, let's say, destruction of destruction of war, the facilities because of the World War, or it was not because of a stock market crash like for the 1929 global, the Great Depression, or because of the mortgage crisis in US, which was originating in the housing market. It is far different from that in the sense that because of the lockdown, which actually was resorted to reduce the spread of the pandemic, that led to stoppage of production. So this is something very new, and because of this and because of the pervasiveness of this lockdown, which is actually, I would say, happening in more than 170 countries in the world, that's the reason why this has reached catastrophic proportions. So I think that is one of the things that we should understand here. And so as you can see, some of the estimates which are available, like ILO, which is showing us that 230 million full-time jobs are going to be lost because of this crisis. And according to OECD estimates, GDP of the world is going to reduce by around 1.5%. So these are all very, very negative signs which would actually lead to severe disruptions in economic activities in the world in the time to come. If you look at trade, if you look at what WTO has actually predicted, WTO has given 3 scenarios, and if I take an average of those scenarios, it actually tells us that trade is going to contract in most of the countries by more than 10%. So we are actually, if you look at the constituents of GDP, the external front is not looking very promising. Investment front is not looking very promising. I'll come to those points later also because of the low business sentiments. The government expenditure is the only way out that seems so like we need a Keynesian kind of a policy stimulus. And on the other hand, as we'll see a little bit later also, that the consumption is also not showing a lot of promise. Even in case of India, consumption had actually come down. So the growth of consumption actually come down. So all these things are telling us that GDP figures are not going to revive, or it is going to be muted. And if you now look at the situation of the pandemic today, if you look at that, then there are more than 6.3 million confirmed COVID cases worldwide, and there are around 0.3 million deaths. And if you look at India, between Jan 30 to 4 June 2020, then there are 207,615 confirmed COVID cases, out of which 5,815 deaths. So these are actually huge numbers, in the sense that not because of the magnitude of the numbers, but because the exponential trend that has been observed in the increment of these numbers. And if this exponential trend continues, then it can take epic proportions in no time. Now, if you come to the economic front, you will see the oil economy is crumbling, and it is very evident. And in some time, I think in the last month, the oil futures were actually trading in negative, which was, I think, never observed before. Then in US, mortgage defaults look imminent. So again, we can have a housing crisis like 2007-8. So this crisis is a combination of crises that we have actually observed earlier, like 1972-73 oil price crisis, and then 2007-8 global financial crisis. So this is a health contagion which has converted into an economic contagion. And because of that, the investors are looking for safe parking of their money. Normally in these circumstances, money moves to developed countries, and that's what is happening. And if you look at the emerging markets, I think they were the major losers. If you look at the data of March and April 2020, only in March, if you look at only the data in March, $15 million in equity and debt has gone out of India. So you can well understand the magnitude of reduction in the foreign exchange reserves that we have. And all these points out that difficult times ahead unless proper corrective measures are taken. So you can see that we are not actually finding any silver lining going into the crisis, during the crisis. Now let's see the Indian scenario just before the crisis. So if you look at Indian scenario just before the crisis, it is very evident we were slowing down. So if you look at the quarter-to-quarter data, which we have taken here from 2017-18 till 2019-20, it is very evident that India was slowing down. While investment has been slowing down, there were legacy problems which were related to the NPS in the financial sector. There was a power sector distress. We had further distress in the NBFC sector, IL and FS crisis, then also in the other cooperative banking crisis like the Punjab Maharashtra cooperative bank crisis. And all this led to the slowdown in employment growth. So if you look at the projections, now let us come to the projections part. If you look at the projections for post-COVID-19 India, then if you look at projections made by Fitch to IMF, then it is ranging, the GDP growth is ranging from 0.8 to 1.9% for India. Unemployment numbers, according to some estimates, have reached 38 million. The unorganized sector, which was already reeling due to the demonetization and slowdown in the world demand, is witnessing a staggering estimated unemployment rate of 23.8%. So please try to understand that if you compare India with many developed countries, then India's open unemployment rate was much less than many developed countries, because a country like India cannot actually survive unemployment because we don't have unemployment benefits. Now, in that scenario, if it is reaching 23.8% in the informal sector, you can well understand the state of affairs in our country. So what is required is a massive dose of economic impetus, and that's what the economy was looking forward. Now, what had been the policy response? Now we are looking for a huge stimulus to revive the economy because there is a huge loss in jobs, both in informal sector and to an extent in the formal sector. In many cases in the formal sector, if it was not job loss, but the wage or the salaries given to the employees had come down by almost, in many cases, by 50%. In many cases in private sector, the employees were not getting a salary for 1 or 2 months. So there was a huge loss in income. Then what was the policy response? Quick policy response was, it started with an announcement of 15,000 crore allocation for the health sector to improve the health facilities. It was followed by the finance minister's announcement of a 1.75 lakh crore scheme to help the economically weaker sections to survive the loss of jobs and income. And alongside, the RBI was also trying to increase the liquidity in the system by reducing the repo rate. So the policies were also taken to reduce the debt burden, to reduce the stringency in classifying the assets as NPS, and also allowing the states to actually take more advances under the ways and means advances from the RBI. So all these were, I think, right kind of measures, but the magnitude of the measures that was required to revive the economy in the kind of economic stress it was actually absent. It was not even 2% of the GDP. Whereas if you look at the most of the countries in the world, their stimulus packages included direct income transfer, and almost all in all the cases, it hovered around 10% of their GDP. So, but a stimulus to match the extent of the damage was missing. So to start with, it was missing. So after that, what was observed? So, but then the government did realize, government was actually formulating the policies. So they did realize that 2% of the GDP kind of stimulus will not be enough. So the grand stimulus package was announced by the Honorable Prime Minister under the Atmanirbhar Bharat package. Now, if you look at the, so I'm not going into details because most of the people know it, but I'll just highlight certain things so that it helps us to actually analyze the policies that were taken by the Prime Minister, the government, and along with the RBI. So if you look at the 5 pillars of Atmanirbhar Bharat, so you will see it was basically economy, infrastructure, system, vibrant demography, and demand. So all these factors were together looked at through the policy announcements that were made over, I think, 4 to 5 days by the finance minister after the initial announcements were made by the Honorable Prime Minister. Now here, if you look at the special economic and comprehensive package of 20 lakh crore was given, which was around 10% of the India's GDP. And the package catered to various sections, including cottage industry, MSMEs, laborers, middle class industries, among others. And the slogan now, the new slogan is you become vocal for our local products and make them global. So what actually was emphasized was you should produce most of the products that you need, and also you want to export within the boundaries of the country. And you also need to make them global in the sense that you also need to brand them in such a manner that they get a global market. So it was a combination of income increase for rural areas, coupled with enhancing disposable income in the hand of the salaried people, cheap credit for the MSMEs, protectionist policies in some crucial areas like defense, and announcement of structural reforms in some major areas, including defense, aviation, and others. So, on the other hand, the RBI was asked to provide adequate liquidity through certain measures to complement this fiscal stimulus. So, it was a combination of fiscal and monetary stimulus package, and which was thought and which is thought to actually have the potential to revive the economy in the coming days. Now, if I diagnose the policies, now the policies as they were combinations of short-term, medium-term, and long-term policies. So from short-term income enhancement to structural adjustment programs. It was an all-inclusive policy. So, but what was required, according to me and many, thinkers, was that in the short term, money is required to be given in the hand of the people, especially poor and lower middle class, middle income class. So why? Because these people, their marginal propensity to consume is higher than the other income classes, and so it was felt that if you are giving money in the hand of these people, this can instantly revive demand, at least for low value added essential manufactured products. Because anyway the government is giving free food grains to the poor, so maybe the basic needs of food and other things, basic needs are actually fulfilled, but they need other low value added manufactured products which cannot be bought without giving income to these people. Because given the fact that 90% of the workforce is employed in the informal sector, and given this sector it was already badly impacted by demonetization and then lack of demand, external demand, and because of the contraction of many of the economic activities. Now post-COVID, given that there was a huge disruptions, given the fact that a lot of migrant labor force had to come back to their homes and to their original places, and this led to a disruption of this particular sector, and these disruptions is not going to correct very soon. So these people, they are, even if the government is giving such a huge a stimulus package, instantly the income in the hand of these people are not going to go up. So if you want to revive the income, then revive the demand, then income has to be somehow given in the hand of these people. So I think that is somewhere missing, and government may take additional steps, additional announcements may be made, even under existing policies of the government, through which a little more income can be given in the hands of the people. So now if you see, so thus if you look at the GDP from the expenditure side, given that external front is not looking promising, given the investment sentiments are quite bleak, even though government has given a humongous amount of stimulus measures for the revival of the investment, but even then, until and unless these people think that the world is going to revive, the demand is going to revive, this may not lead to higher investments, because these are all in the nature of cheap credit. Thus, what is left? Consumption fueled by government expenditure and accommodating monetary policy to keep the interest rate low is the need of the hour. So the last part, keeping the interest rate low, has been done by the RBI through series of repo rate cuts and increasing the liquidity in the economy. So that is now being observed. Slowly, even the deposit rates are also coming down. Even SBI has reduced the deposit rates by 50 basis points. So that's we are seeing. But on the first part, consumption fueled by the government expenditure, I think that linkage is still very weak. So some kind of a direct income transfer program can be thought of by the government. So the other part where I have some doubts is that we have actually announced so many measures at the same time. It is very difficult, according to me, to manage such a huge change. So the government needs to look at its operational efficiency very, very closely, because such a huge change is not very easy to manage. So I think there a lot of effort has to be given, and new improved mechanisms to increase the efficiency must be thought about. Otherwise, this huge kind of a change cannot be managed. The second part is that the shattered confidence of the workers, especially in the informal sector and among the urban casual labor force, will require more than just policy measures to revive. The government must be able to instill confidence in this group, because please try to understand, it is not the time to play a blame game between the center and the state. All the governments, all the arms of the governments, they must work together to bring back the confidence and income potential of this particular segment, because this segment is huge. This is more than 40 crores. So this segment, if this segment is not looked at, economic revival will be a dream. So I think here a lot of work needs to be done, and there needs to be a lot of I think, measures which can increase the confidence of this sector. Because the last point I think is very, very important, and it has been seen even in Europe, where if such disruptions happen in the labor market, where workers lose their jobs, here it is not prolonged. Till now it is maybe 2-3 months, but the way the situation has unfolded, this may lead to the workers becoming disinterested. And history has shown if the workers become disinterested, unemployment becomes enduring, which means that unemployment is very difficult to reduce, because these people, even if they find some opportunities outside the states, they may not be willing to go. And then their unemployment will be actually enduring, and unemployment may increase or it may not come down. So here I think a lot of efforts are given by the government. Now, is everything lost? No, there are a lot of opportunities. There are some, definitely silver linings are there. What are they? Some of them I have mentioned here. Let me mention that there was a publication which came out from RIS in Delhi in conjunction with ASEAN India Center and EEPC. So I have borrowed liberally from that publication because it is latest, and 40 very eminent people have written things about, I mean, I don't include myself in that, but there are certain eminent people who have written a lot of articles there, and I have liberally borrowed from there. I must acknowledge that. So what are the opportunities? Given that the origin of the crisis was from China, global supply chains are severely disrupted. So major manufacturing nations in the world are now giving signals that they wish to diversify the sourcing for global value chains. Now, so who has this golden opportunity? The MSME sector in India has a golden opportunity to now include itself in the global value chain. Please remember that today the production that is being organized all over the world is not in silos. So we have a production network kind of a system where part of the value chains are being produced in certain nations. So we are producing part of the product in certain nations where it can be produced at the lowest cost. Now this whole thing has now been disrupted because of this COVID-19 pandemic, because the borders have been shut, trade has stopped in most of the cases. So what now, after the trade open up, what will happen? Since there is a feeling worldwide that China was the epicenter of this crisis and it may have been man-made, so there can be a shift from China to other regions or other countries. But here there are many competitors. There is Vietnam, there is Malaysia, there is Indonesia, there is Thailand. So if India wants to harness this, India can, provided the MSME sector is willing to take up this opportunity and include itself in the global value chain. Now, you can see that look at the massive quantity of support that is now being given to almost all the countries in the world, and even in the consuming countries where they are mainly importing essential products from other countries. There will be a surge in the demand post the pandemic, and I can see that once we can get the vaccine, I think there will be a surge in the demand. And what are the sectors the Indian MSMEs can look at? The engineering sector, since some of the industries which may try to relocate their parts and components and ingredients production in India will be automobile, electrical, including power sector, electronics, machine tools, machinery, along with sectors like chemicals, including pharmaceuticals, agro-processing, garments, food processing and leather. So all these sectors are sectors where India has a lot of competitive advantage. India is already major exporters in most of these cases. So the MSME sector, with their low cost model, if they can come up with innovative methods, being aided by the government policies which have been announced under the Atmanirbhar scheme, I think there is a lot of scope. Then it will, and once you look at, this will also create related services, increase in demand for related services like transport, sales, repair, telecom, travel, tourism, finance, etc. So this will also create, linkages with other sectors which are related to these sectors, and mainly here we are looking at the services sector, which has been very severely affected because of this crisis, and then those can be revived. And if you look at the other part, if you look at the digital transformation that has led to reduced cost and increased efficiencies, this is now at a stage of leapfrog. So this can now leapfrog because a lot of technologies have come in to tackle the problem of travel and virtual interactions. So if you look at a country like India, if you look at India, India could take the advantage of the IT revolution in the 1990s. So India is in a similar situation now. It can again take the lead, and it can now be a global leader in implementation of these new disruptive technologies to face the challenges in a post-COVID era of less travel and more virtual world. What would this involve? This involves technologies like Internet of Things, robotics, automation, artificial intelligence, blockchain, drones, cloud services. This. So India may have to move very rapidly as a world leader in this front. So there is a lot of opportunities because each crisis is not only posing challenges, it also brings in a lot of opportunities. So these are some of the opportunities which have been identified and in which India can take common trade policies, and the firms have innovative capabilities and the people have innovative capabilities, then India can harness these opportunities and we can go forward. Now, finally, I'll come to the challenges on the trade front because little bit, we should also look at the trade front because this is an area where it is severely disrupted, and this is an area also where India has been doing well, but not very much in 2019 or 2018, where the years, as I'm looking at the export figures, if you look at January to January 2019 to 2020, if I look at the January figures, they were down 1.9%. And when I look at the sectors and I look at the destinations, and it has been seen that the slowdown has been caused majorly in the traditional markets who are now buying less from India. Now I have done some analysis and I have found out who are the major importers from India. They are China, Netherlands, Nepal, Singapore, and Malaysia. And but if you look at the intensity of the COVID pandemic in these countries, then you will see that China, Netherlands, they are very, very impacted. So the post-COVID trade strategy should take this into account. That means we are not only going to look at products, but we are also going to look at destinations, and we are not only going to look at only economic aspects. We are also going to look at the spread of the pandemic and the intensity of the spread of the pandemic and the response of those countries to the spread of the pandemic, because that will determine whether demand is going to revive in those countries or not. So products-wise screening should be done, and it should take into account demand elasticities. I'll little bit elaborate on that in a subsequent slide, and the impact of COVID in the likely destinations. So other than this, we also need to look at other factors like tariffs, non-tariff barriers, price competitiveness, etc., to develop a list which can be targeted to step up external trade. So what is the way forward? It was found by a 2018 study that products like textiles, petroleum, dairy products, tobacco, etc., were found to have income elasticities less than 1. So this can be higher up in our priority, because if I am looking at products which are less sensitive to income, then they are also less sensitive to the business cycles. So this can be one of the factors which can be taken into account while we are looking at the list of products which can be prioritized. Then we can also look at the pending regional trading agreements, because this is absolutely important, I think, because until and unless we can sign regional trading agreements, getting access to the markets post-COVID, I think, will be really, really difficult. So the Indian government should be, I think, more proactive in signing the trade agreements with EU, US, Australia, New Zealand, and also now after Brexit has happened with Great Britain separately. And given that I am part of IIFT and I have been doing certain projects with the government and with other funding agencies, we have found that actually India needs to concentrate on reducing the non-tariff barriers. Why? Because given that WTO was formed in 1995, today tariffs are no longer disruptive. More disruptive is the NTBs which are more covert and which are more subtle. So these are mainly in the form of performance. These are mainly in the form of sanitary phytosanitary measures, some technical requirements, inspections. So these are used by many of the destination countries, especially the developed countries who are very well trained to do these things. They restrict the trade with developing countries through these policies. So what we have found is that NTBs should be focused and they should be lessened when the Indian government is negotiating with these countries, and that can lead to some real increase in the market access. So this is, I think, utmost important if we want to revive trade. Also, finally, we also should make allowance for the severity of the COVID and the spread, so that we can consider markets which have actually tackled it better, and where its spread is less, to look at sustainable markets in the future. So all these points should be kept in mind by the government to design the post-COVID economic strategy. So it would include monetary policy, it would include fiscal stimulus, it would include trade policies, it would include health sector policies. The health sector spending should increase phenomenally in India because that is nowhere near the international benchmark. All these things together can take India forward, and it can revive the growth in the coming quarters. Thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Dr. Bibek Ray Chaudhuri spoke about the economic downturn and its fallout. In fact, the scale and speed of the collapse of economic activity that the world has witnessed is unprecedented. According to Goldman and Sachs, economic downturn this time will be 4 times stronger than the financial meltdown. US unemployment rate is already at its highest since the Second World War. India's unemployment rate is already at 27%, highest in the last 45 years. We are living through a combination of Spanish flu, elements of Great Depression, and the elements of the Great Recession of 2007 and 8. The world economy is at the crossroads. The future pathways still are uncertain. All depends on the policy packages, international cooperations, and the political engagements among the leaders. Now, already Dr. Bibek Ray Chaudhuri spoke about mainly the Indian economy, crisis that we are facing, and the opportunities lying ahead. Our next speaker is Dr. Devaki Ghose. We are anticipating a different narrative from Dr. Devaki Ghose about the COVID-19, its fallout, and the future pathways. Thank you for taking time and being with us today.
Thank you everyone for being here. So without further ado, I'll start today. Just to introduce myself, I finished my PhD from University of Virginia this year, and I will be joining the Development Economics Research Group in the World Bank this August. So today we are going to talk about, this forum is about a very important topic, economic challenges and opportunities in the post-COVID scenario. I'm going to talk about how the current crisis has posed serious challenges for global supply chains across the world, with a particular focus on India. Now, if you look at this, empty grocery shelves has become a common sight around the world as the crisis set in. Now, at the same time that you see empty grocery shelves around the world, there is this picture of a farmer feeding his iceberg lettuce, which he could not sell to his cow. And this cow in this picture is feasting on a bowl of freshly picked strawberries because, again, the farmer could not sell it. Elsewhere in the US, a dairy farmer is dumping the milk that he could not sell. So isn't it a paradox that at the same time we see grocery shelves where people cannot buy what they want to buy, and on the other hand, producers throwing away their fresh produce? Now, this no longer remains a paradox if we think about how the coronavirus crisis has disrupted global supply chains across the world and has especially impacted the transportation sector. As you know, in any market, there is a supply side and a demand side. And very simply, the market clears when supply equals demand. Now, what the current crisis is unprecedented in that it has affected both the supply side of the market and the demand side of the market. Now, if we take a step back and only think about the supply side, there are two issues here. First, the inputs need to reach the factories in order to be produced into final goods, which again needs to reach the final market. The current coronavirus crisis has created severe disruptions in this chain. And how so? The first is the lack of workers. Migrant workers are a significant part of the labor force, not just in India, but the entire world. Border closures have made it extremely difficult or even impossible for Eastern European workers to move and work in Western European farms, which they have done for centuries. And Mexican farm workers cannot move to the US to do the work in the farms. Now, India's unprecedented lockdown has created a lot of problems for the interstate migrants, which comprise at least 20% of the Indian workforce. Now, the lack of workers means that there are a significant chunk of farm work that couldn't be done, or the farm produce that cannot be transported. And these workers are not only employed by the farm sectors, they are also required very much in unloading cargo that comes from incoming shipments or loading cargo onto outgoing shipments at the cargo freight stations. Now, this leads to congestion in ports, and this ultimately leads to slowdown, or it makes it very difficult for goods to go in and out of the country. Now, there are many ways in which goods are transported, right? So there is sea and there is road transportation. Now, the unprecedented lockdown has made border crossing very complicated, and it has created massive impediments in the interstate mobility of goods. There's also the problem of lack of drivers, many of whom were migrant workers or workers who cannot come to work because of the lockdown. Air freight, a lot of which goes in the belly of passenger jets, is facing severe disruptions as well, because 2/3 of the world's airplanes are currently grounded because of lack of demand. Now, that was all disruptions in the supply side. How did the current crisis affect this link here, that is the demand side link? Now, there are two issues here. First, consumers need money to buy goods, and they need to come to the market to buy these goods. The current crisis has severely disrupted the demand side as well. The first is that, again, as I said, people need money to buy goods. There is massive fall in consumption spending due to the income loss created by the crisis, as many people have lost their jobs. Now, this graph is taken from the CMI, which shows the unemployment rate in India. During the beginning of February, the unemployment rate was just about 7%. And in the mid-April, the unemployment rate jumped to more than 3 times to almost 26%. So this income loss created massive fall in consumption spending. And what is important is that we are not only talking about fall in consumption spending, we are talking about very unequal effect across sectors, because the composition of spending has changed dramatically. Consumers today are substituting restaurant food for home food. They are substituting travel and outdoor entertainment for online entertainment like movies, video games. Now, what this means is that many stores like that are in the retail sector or in restaurant are facing bankruptcy and are shutting down. Same for tourism. There have been some very small sectors such as video game and online stores, for example, Amazon, that have actually seen increase in profit. Now, this simultaneous overproduction and goods shortage no longer remains a surprise when we take into account the effects of both supply and demand side disruptions. Now, but these disruptions are more severe when the shock hits at the global scale. Now, this very toy diagram of demand and supply that we just saw can be translated into a more complicated diagram which shows how this shock has affected the global economy. Now, this looks a little bit complicated, but if we break down the components, it's not that much complicated. So there are household, governments, and business. And the current store closures, delivery restrictions, and travel bans has first affected consumer spending. Now, what is consumer spending? Consumer spending is just spending on goods that are produced by businesses. Now, as consumer spending falls, businesses shut down and file for bankruptcy. This means, again, that businesses lay off workers, this reduce work hours, and this again feeds into the households. They lose income. Now, that's kind of what we were discussing before. And where does the rest of the world come in here? As you see, households also demand imported goods. As households, let's say we are talking about India right now, as households in India face income loss, that reduces the demand for imports from the rest of the world. Now, we are talking about a crisis that has hit not just India, but as Professor Bibek Ray Chaudhuri pointed out, 170 countries in the world. Now, if demand for imports reduces from 170 countries in the world at the same time, this actually reduces the payment, the rest of the world's income, and also how much you are willing to pay for imports from other countries. So which means that India's payments from exports also reduces as the rest of the world's income reduces. This affects the business sector again. So and this is the external loop that I just added here. And now as businesses, and then this circular loop continues. Now, where does the financial sector come in? Again, households save, and this saving is plowed into investments and back into business. So what is the unprecedented scale of this crisis is that it has affected all these points in the global economic system. As Professor Amitabh Ghosh was talking about, that it is combining elements of the flu and the Great Depression in that it affected all these arrows in the global supply chain. So in light of this, what can governments do? The government essentially has three very broad measures of policy available. The first are fiscal policy measures, which are carried out by the government and have implications for the budget. So this could be government spending, cut in taxes. Then there are monetary policy measures that are carried out by the central banks to influence the money supply in the economy, for example, in changing interest rates. And the third are exchange rate and external sector policy measures. Now, this actually means that basically toying with the exchange rate to influence exports and imports, which is generally not favored, and it requires coordinated actions by governments of many countries, because the third policy actually influences many countries very directly. So essentially what the government has in its hand are fiscal policy measures and monetary policy measures. And as we discussed, because this shock has affected these arrows in the global economic system, these two policy measures both are very important. However, among these three, fiscal policy measures by the government are most directly linked with the funding of health sector and other welfare programs, and is likely the most important of all three types of policy responses to the ongoing crisis, at least in the short term. Now, with the latest announcement, India's announced a stimulus package of 10% as a fraction of GDP. On the face of it, the number sounds huge, But we have to remember something, that India is one of the very few countries that actually announced a stimulus package without disaggregating it into the fiscal and the monetary components. And this led to a lot of calculations and speculations by analysts who actually tried to tease out how much of this is actually fiscal response. And after doing that, we get to a number of 3.8%, which is kind of on the higher side. There are others who have estimated to be 1% or 2%. And as I said, because the government did not separately publish, it's a little bit of hand waving there. But if you compare this, it's towards one of the very low sides. Comparable countries, Brazil in the BRIC consortium has spent around 8%. And now what goes into this fiscal policy measures? I'm just going to talk about some of the broad components that is going to help us analyze some of these features. So one is the additional funds pumped into the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Program. This has also given direct cash transfers to women and pensioners. And extra money has been pumped into the public distribution system through transfer of extra cereals and grains and pulses. And there are some other funding. For example, deferment of tax and social security contributions. Now, there are two problems here. The one is implementation problem, and the other problem is this policy actually what it should be? So before we discuss the second point, we should first imagine that this is the best that could have been done. Then how are the implementation? So in the best of time, there are severe leakages in the public distribution system. Now, a month after the announcement of the compulsory pulses scheme, less than a quarter of the announced quantity was sent to state, and less than 10% was distributed by the states. Now, even though the government announced a doubling of PDS rations for 3 months, many remained excluded from the net. For example, in Jharkhand, an estimated 7 lakh households have pending ration card applications. Now, in a survey of 11,000 migrant workers in April, more than 3/4 reported that they would run out of food in 2 days. Of them, 98% had not received cash relief from the government. 96% had not received government rations. And so what we're talking about here, even though if this policy was the best, there is a severe need to implement it quickly. Time is of essence here, because lost time is equal to lost lives in this particular case. Now, many economists have proposed some sort of direct targeted cash transfer, because it has been argued that cash transfer could be easier and it could also reach people faster. So far, what are the direct cash transfer schemes that the government has taken? So far, announcements have been made for distribution of extra rice, pulse, and wheat through the PDS for the next 3 months, which is a very important and very welcome announcement, because even if people get cash, sometimes there could be food shortages. So this is a very important step. There have been direct cash transfers on a limited scale to widows, pensioners, persons with disabilities, and women with Janadhana bank accounts. And the government has also announced that they will pay the part of EPF contribution for the next 3 months under certain conditions. And there have been some provision of free food and one-time cash payments to homeless people. The main problem here is that if the government were to do a direct cash transfer, how do you identify the target population? For example, in the US, because most people file their income tax, 85% of households have received direct stimulus payments on their bank accounts. For India, this is not possible because only 4.1% of adults filed income tax returns in 2018. So you cannot use the income tax returns as a way to distribute money. Now, this leads us to think about what are the different schemes that are there in place. So the largest by far is the public distribution system, which has 230 million cards, and about 2/3 of the population being inside the system. The MNREGA scheme has 128 million active workers, and then the Janadhana has 383 million accounts, and so forth. And so what economists are recommended is a much more universal cash transfer to the public distribution system. And what is the main argument for that? The main argument for that is that beyond basic food items like pulses and cereals, individuals actually need cash to buy other necessities like medical expenses and other food. And this kind of direct cash transfer, also called helicopter money, will also simplify the measures undertaken by various state governments and the slew of complicated measures announced by the central government. And now let's talk a little bit about some of the measures that various state governments have undertaken. So there have been several initiatives like provision of free rations, one-time cash grants by a number of state governments. And some state governments have also introduced one-time cash transfer ranging from a paltry 500 to rupees 2,000 for return migrant workers, depending on which state we are talking about. However, there have been some states that have been proposing diluting regional labor laws. Now, states like Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh, and Himachal Pradesh have proposed extending the hours of works of factory workers to a maximum of 12 hours a day and 72 hours a week. Uttar Pradesh has actually announced considering suspension of labor laws for the next 3 years with a few exceptions, and same for Madhya Pradesh. Now, what the logic of the regional governments is that there is unemployment. We need people to be employed, and if the labor laws are diluted, this is going to create incentives for firms to retain their workers. Now, what's the serious problem with this logic? The problem is that the suspension of labor laws actually disenfranchises workers. It actually creates very unequal bargaining powers. It tilts the bargaining power, it reduces the bargaining power of workers, and it could lead to basic human rights violation. If we think, then in that case, how could you save the economy from severe unemployment? Can we take a leaf out of from what some other countries have done to reduce some of this, to reduce unemployment and protect workers? So how does the government policy response for worker protection compare to other countries? Now, at least 12 countries, mostly in Europe, have prevented large-scale unemployment by channeling relief through employers to their employees, which is called employer subsidy. Now, what we're talking about here is that these governments have basically said that if you are going to retain your workforce, then we are going to pay a certain proportion of the wage bill of this of the workforce. Now, what this prevents is that it prevents this short-term separation of employers and employees, which creates severe disruptions in the labor market. And it is also able to prevent this massive unemployment that has been witnessed in some other countries. Now, this is another way of saying that we are going to protect workers and we are going to reduce unemployment. So India's fiscal policy has no such direct support to workers. Most of the package provides concessional loans to MSMEs and in some cases government contribution to provident funds. And there are some of the regional state governments which are thinking about diluting labor laws to protect workers, according to these governments. Now, what are the immediate challenges here? The major portion of the Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan package focuses on providing credit to farmers, medium and small enterprises, and increasing liquidity in the financial sector. Now, the very simple logic here is that since loans have to be repaid, do you or I want to borrow to increase production when the future actually seems uncertain? And also, even if we borrow and even if we increase our production, who is going to buy from us if there are no consumers who have money? So in this case, a fiscal stimulus which entails increased spending and cash transfers by the government is very much needed to generate demand. As a few minutes earlier, I was talking about how there are different types of measures like fiscal measures and monetary policy measures, and why fiscal policy measures are, at least in the short run, the need of the hour. And this is exactly because fiscal stimulus can put hands in the money of people, consumers, and generate demand. And then in the longer term, it actually makes sense to give more loans at concessional terms to MSMEs so that to revive the economy. And in fact, many prominent economists have suggested monetizing the deficit that will be created by these measures. And the main reason is that in the short run, the economy has to be saved. People need money to survive, and this can only be done with a fiscal stimulus. On top of that, it is also equally important to ease logistical challenges and operational bottlenecks brought about by the lockdown. I was talking about how this crisis has severely disrupted transportation and the movement of goods. Even if you give money to MSMEs, it would not be very useful if these MSMEs face severe operational bottlenecks and logistical challenges in transporting their goods. Now, what are some of the short and medium run challenges? So we have now, as today we are doing this digitally, and India, like most other countries in the world, have transferred to digital learning. However, only 8% of households with children in the 5 to 24 age group have a computer with internet connection. So another immediate thing for the government is to ensure universal access to internet. And this cannot be done overnight, and that's why this is more of a short and medium run challenge. But again, this lack of internet access is going to increase the learning gap between people who have access and who do not very much in the future. And the last point today that I'm going to talk about is workplace restructuring. Now, there is a trade-off between increasing mechanization demanded by the current crisis and growing unemployment. Now, why do we need increasing mechanization? Because in many cases, it's not practical for employees to work in small, cramped places anymore. And therefore, some of these works have to be substituted by robots in the face of this crisis. However, at the same time, there is vast unemployment, and increasing mechanization can actually increase the problem of unemployment. And this is a very, very important and serious issue, and for which it's not only the government is responsible, but all of us, including private players and firms, have to think about this workplace restructuring problem very much, how to solve this tension between increasing mechanization and vast unemployment. And I just want to thank you for your time and for listening to me. And I will be very excited to hear your thoughts and listen to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, madam, for such an inspiring talk. We have a firm faith that the students, who are the major stakeholders of the economy, will take more informed decisions in the better world tomorrow. Thank you, madam. I'm very happy to know CEO sir, principal sir is there with us. Because of paucity of time, we will start taking questions. I have been receiving ample questions during the session, but I will not be able to take many. We can start with Joynto Nath Mukherjee, Director, Heritage Business School. Sir, you can ask your question.
No, I was saying that considering that India already has a high fiscal deficit, we all love to have a fiscal stimulus to stimulate demand, but we already have a high fiscal deficit. So I would want your response on that, basically. Can we really afford a high fiscal stimulus?
We know that we have a very high fiscal deficit, but in this kind of scenario, there is no other alternative. I had explained in my presentation that when, see what is happening, if your economic activity is stopped, then please try to understand that the tax collection is also stopped. So there would be a huge shortfall in the tax collection. So anyway, whether you give a fiscal stimulus or not, your fiscal numbers are not going to be good. That is for sure. Now let us come to what are our options. What are the options? If I don't want the government to spend in this kind of a scenario, who is going to spend? I cannot leave the people to their fate, because in these kind of scenarios, as we have already seen in the earlier crisis periods, during the Great Depression or during the global financial crisis or during the oil shocks, no private enterprise will come to the forefront. If you look at India, as I had explained, that even before the COVID crisis, India was not doing well. It was already slowing down. not only that, the fiscal numbers which were put forth by the government was questionable. I mean, actually the fiscal numbers were much more negative than that was being projected. Now, what is the other option? I have monetary policy. Now, if you look at monetary policy in a country like India, where most of the country is not under the formal sector, any kind of monetary transmission mechanism is quite weak. Most of the expenditures are insensitive to rate of interest. So, however we may reduce the repo rate, that demand may not spark. That is one. Second, if you are giving more liquidity in the hands of the banks, let's say, now the banks are already having a lot of problems with their assets. They have a high NPA. There is a lot of debt which had not come back. So you cannot really rely on that mechanism also. So we don't have any other option but to go for fiscal policy, even if it means that it will lead to a stress in the fiscal numbers, because until and unless the economy revives, the tax revenue is not going to go up, and there is no other way the government can actually get the money. Of course, the government has taken other policies like disinvestments. Already a lot of privatization initiatives have been announced. Through that, some money may come, but that would never be enough. So until and unless you revive the demand, there is no chance that your fiscal numbers will be better in the future. So we cannot rely on any other policy right now. That's my take on the subject. Now, if Devaki wants to ask, add something.
I think you have covered the point, answered the question very nicely. I don't have much to add, but I would just like to say that currently, because the oil prices are falling a lot, so that is also helping India's fiscal deficit a little bit because there is more earning from that front. And also, I would like to emphasize the point that this monetizing the deficit currently is going to probably downgrade India's credit rating in the future, which could be negative for foreign investments in the future. But that's more of a long-term goal. Currently, if the economy is not revived, and reviving the economy is only possible through more fiscal expenditures, then even in the future, giving loans to MSMEs would not help them, or none of the other measures would help them. So even if in the long run it leads to credit downgrading, it's essential in the short run to spend more to revive the economy.
Thank you both the speakers and Jointo sir for such a question. Thanks a lot. Next up, Rishabh Bose. You can come up with your question.
Good evening to everyone present here. I'm Rishabh Bose from the Heritage College Department of Commerce, third year. To start with, I'd like to thank both the speakers for their extremely valuable time. My question is to Devaki ma'am. COVID-19 has affected almost all aspects of our life. How do you think it would affect the prospects of the students wishing to study abroad? Ma'am.
Yeah. So it's a very, very important question, and I think the major issue currently is, as you know, like all the visa offices are closed and nobody is taking new visa applications. So what I understand is that it could be that this could lead to a delay in the international universities taking in students. But I don't think it's going to severely, if a student wants to pursue studies abroad, I don't think it's going to severely stop them, because ultimately the universities in abroad are also under budget constraints. The COVID-19 crisis has led to loss of revenue and tuitions for them. So in the end, in order for the universities to survive, they would need international students. So in the short run, I don't think this is going to be completely disrupted, but in the very short run, because of completely dysfunctional visa offices right now, it could be disrupted.
Bhankar Mishra, you can come up with your question.
A very good evening to everyone present. My question is to Dr. Bibek Ray Chaudhuri. Sir, the global supply chain, which was built on efficiency considerations, has been severely affected by the COVID-19 phenomenon. Do you think in the post-COVID-19 scenario, there will be a reversal of global supply links and the nations will move towards self-sufficiency? And also, sir, you said about the Chinese companies shifting to India and the Indian SMEs benefiting from that. Sir, what do you think India has that other countries do not have that they would shift to India? Thank you, sir.
Okay, that's a very good question. Now, okay, so see, let me tell you something that there are certain things within globalization which cannot be reversed, but there are certain other facets which can be reversed. So one of them is that the world can go towards more protectionism, but I don't think that protectionism can sustain in the long run. It can be very short-term or medium-term kind of strategies where the countries are trying to basically protect their employment. So that's, I think, the whole idea about protectionism. They're trying to protect their employment because given the the spread of globalization, what is happening? There are winners and there are losers. So naturally, the sectors which are winning and the people who can get employed in those sectors, they are winning. And people who are not getting those opportunities to get into those sectors, they are losing. And if you look at the fallouts of globalization, in many cases, globalization has also given rise to more informalization. So there is a large informal sector also because globalization has actually caused disruptions where more people have been forced to actually go towards informal sector. Now, if you look at China, China became a major producer of the world. They even surpassed US. And please don't think China is only producing low value-added products. If you look at the value-added products that China produces today, that is far more than even Japan. So China is also producing very high value-added products. Now suddenly those production processes transferred to some other country, let alone India, is not, I think, a very likely thing that is going to happen. But yes, slowly in the medium run, given the problem that has originated from China, there may be some shift towards certain countries. Now, why do we think India may benefit? India has a very large, medium and small enterprises sector because our large-scale industries are not anywhere in comparison to China and many other countries. So where I think we can compete is in the MSME sector. Now, but the problem in MSME sector is well known. It is starved of finances. They are actually using low technology. They are also very much dependent on formal sector because they may be supplying intermediate products. So these are the problems that are there. But given the policy package of the government, if this sector can now revive themselves and they can be more innovative, if the government goes for more liberal kind of a FDI regime, then we may see some shift in case of India, and I have specified those sectors. If you look at my slide, we have already specified those sectors where actually Indian companies can, the MSMEs can actually join the global value chain. That I have already mentioned: electronics, electrical, and all those sectors, including pharmaceuticals and other chemicals. So that may happen. Now, in your question about the going back to isolated production systems, don't think that is very plausible. Maybe in the in the short term, there may be a chance that because some of the supply chains will be disrupted, so maybe closer to the border places will be selected where so that the supply becomes more stable. That may happen, but I don't think there a major revival is possible in that, because given, ultimately why the production network structure has evolved in this manner, it is because of comparative advantage, both natural and acquired, which those countries have. Now suddenly, because of a pandemic, there cannot be a severe shift in this comparative, both acquired and natural. So I feel some disruptions may be there in the near future, but ultimately in the medium to long run, it will come back to where it was.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you to all for such a wonderful interactive session. I know the listeners have a lot of questions, but due to paucity of time, we might not be able to take more questions. The Department of Commerce, the Heritage College is planning to hold more such webinars in future, and I hope people will participate in more numbers, and then we will have we will try to plan out more interactive sessions for you all. Special thanks to Principal Sir and CEO Sir for being present and encouraging us throughout the seminar. I would now request Professor Namrata Roy to kindly deliver her formal vote of thanks.
The best and beautiful things in the world cannot be seen or even touched. They must be felt by heart. Thank you is one such prayer among them. I consider it a great privilege to propose the vote of thanks to all the dignitaries present here. On behalf of the Heritage College, I would like to thank our speakers, Professor Dr. Bibek Ray Chaudhuri and Dr. Devaki Ghose, for enlightening us with their inspirational and knowledgeable speech. I'm sure everyone present here has a lot to take away from that speech. This webinar would not have been possible without the continuous support and guidance from our Executive Director, Mr. Prabir Roy, our CEO, Mr. Pradeep Kumar Agarwal, and our beloved Principal, Sir, Dr. Pushpita Ranjan Bhattacharya. Thank you, sir, for your encouragement and motivation. An event of this kind cannot happen overnight. The wheel starts rolling months in advance. We have been fortunate enough to take all the technical support and guidance from our moderator, Mr. Debashish Kormukar. I would also like to thank Mrs. Shuhashini Chaudhuri and our respected joint registrar, Dr. Kavita Shastri, for their support. My sincere thanks goes to Head of the Department of Commerce and Economics, Professor Amitava Ghosh and Professor Dr. Debashish Mojumdar for their encouragement and motivation.